Your son nearly died tonight, and I will not let you touch him again." The Duke tore the nursery key from his wife's hand and ordered her expelled from Blackthorn Hall before the child awakened. Eleanor Ashcombe stood beside Henry's bed, listening to the great walnut clock. Its pendulum had stopped at midnight, but something inside the case continued ticking. She immediately moved toward it. 6-year-old Henry lay pale beneath the blue coverlet. His lips had regained a little color, but each breath remained shallow. Eleanor had been the one to find him shaking uncontrollably. She had carried him away from the clock, opened the windows, and held him upright until the spasms passed. Now Cedric looked at her as though she had caused them. Lady Beatrice Ashcombe stood near the fireplace, in a dark green gown, one protective hand resting upon the medicine chest. Widowed 3 years earlier and welcomed into Blackthorn Hall by her brother, she had gradually made herself indispensable first at dinner, then in the household accounts, and finally in Henry's nursery. "The physician warned us about Eleanor's experiments," Beatrice said. "We should have listened sooner." On the carpet lay a dismantled brass spring bearing the initials E.A. Cedric pointed toward it. That was found beneath Henry's pillow. Eleanor crouched and lifted the spring with the edge of her handkerchief. Her father had taught her never to touch unfamiliar metal stained by smoke, powder, or medicine. These initials were engraved backward. Beatrice's fingers tightened against the medicine chest. Cedric frowned. "What difference does that make?" "Dovelines. A considerable one. Whoever copied them saw my mark in a mirror. My tools bear the initials correctly." "Another clever explanation," he replied, then opened the clock. Silence descended upon the nursery. Eleanor rose and faced him. "If I altered it, the evidence will be inside. If I did not, then whoever placed this spring beneath Henry's pillow may still have access to him." Cedric looked toward the clock. For one fleeting moment, the anger left his face. Eleanor saw the man who had once spent an entire night beside her father's workbench, fascinated as she repaired a broken escapement. He knew she understood mechanisms. He also knew she had never risked their son's life. Then Beatrice approached him. "If servants learn that the heir was poisoned by some hidden contraption, every creditor in London will hear of it by morning," she whispered. "The guardianship committee meets next week. Any suggestion that Henry is permanently ill, or that his parents cannot protect him, could place his inheritance under outside control." Cedric's expression hardened again. There it was, the moment in which he could have chosen his son over his pride, evidence over appearances, and his wife over the convenient certainty offered by his sister. He turned away from the clock. "Eleanor will leave tonight." The sentence struck more deeply than his accusation. "You are sending away the person who saved him. I am removing the person whose tools were found in his bed. You saw me place those tools in the locked cabinet downstairs 3 days ago, and Beatrice found one here." Beatrice claims she found one here. His jaw tightened. "Enough." 2 footmen entered. Neither met Eleanor's eyes. She moved to Henry's bedside and touched his damp hair. Cedric caught her wrist. "You will not give him anything. I am saying farewell. You forfeited that privilege." Eleanor looked at the hand around her wrist, then into her husband's face. "You may command the household, Cedric. You may close every door against me, but you will not turn saving my child into a confession of guilt." For an instant, his grip loosened. A faint click sounded behind them. The clock's hand still pointed to 12, but the narrow panel below its face had shifted open by the width of a fingernail. Eleanor smelled something bittersweet at first, then metallic. It was the same odor that had clung to Henry's nightshirt during his earlier attacks. She pulled free and stepped toward the clock. Beatrice moved faster. She shut the panel with her palm and placed herself in front of it. "The mechanism is unstable." "How would you know?" Eleanor asked. Beatrice's face remained composed, but a pulse fluttered beneath her jaw. Cedric signaled to the footmen. They seized Eleanor's arms. Henry stirred as they dragged her toward the door. His eyelids opened, unfocused with exhaustion. "Mother." Eleanor twisted against the men. "I am here, darling." "Aunt Beatrice winds it after midnight," he whispered. Cedric went still. Beatrice crossed the room and drew the coverlet higher over Henry's shoulders. "He is feverish. He does not know what he is saying." Henry's small fingers emerged from beneath the blanket. Something gleamed between them, a sliver of brass, no larger than a thumbnail. "Inside," he murmured. "She puts it inside." Eleanor reached for him, but Cedric stepped between them. "Take her downstairs." The nursery door closed on Henry's frightened face. Eleanor's trunk had already been strapped to the carriage when she was escorted into the entrance hall. Rain struck the tall windows, and several servants stood in the shadows, watching the Duchess of Blackthorn being sent away without her cloak, her money, or her son. Cedric followed her to the doors. "You will remain at Briar Cottage until the physician completes his report. That cottage has been empty for 9 years. It is still part of the estate, and therefore still under your control." His eyes flickered, but he did not deny it. Eleanor removed her wedding ring. For one suspended moment, Cedric seemed to believe she would return it. Instead, she closed her fingers around the gold. "You have accused me before witnesses, denied me access to my child, and refused the simplest examination that might protect him. Remember that those were your decisions, not Beatrice's." She entered the carriage without waiting for his answer. Only after the gates of Blackthorn Hall disappeared behind her did Eleanor open her clenched hand. Henry had pressed the brass sliver into her palm during their struggle. It was not part of the clock. It was the broken tip of a tiny glass vial, sealed at one edge with green wax. Stamped into the wax was the crest of Blackthorn Hall's private infirmary. Then Eleanor noticed a second mark beneath it, a date from 8 years earlier, the year before Henry was born. The date pressed into the green wax troubled Eleanor more than the Blackthorn crest. 8 years earlier, the private infirmary had been closed after an unexplained fire destroyed its medicine stores. Cedric's father had ordered the building sealed, and no one had used its crest since. Yet the wax on the broken vial was clean, glossy, and recently softened. Eleanor wrapped the fragment in her handkerchief and concealed it inside the lining of her glove. The carriage reached Briar Cottage shortly before dawn. No lamps burned inside, and the front door was locked. The driver left Eleanor's trunk in the rain. "Did His Grace also order the cottage left without servants?" she asked. The man avoided her eyes and drove away. Eleanor removed a steel pin from her hair and worked it into the old lock. Her father had taught her that every mechanism revealed the habits of its maker. After 3 careful turns, the door opened. Inside, she found no firewood, food, or prepared bed. This was not temporary accommodation. Someone had meant to frighten her into dependence. Eleanor placed her trunk in the parlor and searched the cottage methodically. The pantry was empty, but the study still contained a writing desk and several estate ledgers abandoned beneath a moth-eaten cloth. She opened the newest volume. For 4 years, she had quietly kept Blackthorn Hall solvent. Cedric had never cared to know how. After his father's death, the estate had inherited broken tenant mills, flooded fields, and contracts written to benefit London merchants. Eleanor had repaired grain scales, redesigned drainage gates, and discovered that a faulty clock in the West Mill caused workers to end their shifts 20 minutes too early each day. Correcting that single mechanism had restored enough production to feed 12 tenant families through winter. Cedric had praised his steward for the improvement. Eleanor had allowed it because Blackthorn needed stability more than she needed applause. Now the figures before her revealed something impossible. The nursery expenses had been copied into the cottage ledger by mistake, or hidden there by someone who expected the book never to be opened. 6 payments had been made to the closed infirmary during the past 3 months. Each payment was recorded as a repair to the nursery clock. Eleanor ran her finger down the amounts. They increased after every one of Henry's attacks. The final payment had been authorized 2 days earlier, though no craftsman had entered Blackthorn Hall. Eleanor knew because she had personally inspected the household visitor book after Henry's previous illness. A knock sounded against the front door. She closed the ledger and reached for the iron poker beside the empty fireplace. "Your Grace," called an elderly voice. "It is Samuel Reed." Eleanor opened the door to find the former Blackthorn gamekeeper holding a lantern and a basket. Reed had served Cedric's father until an injured leg forced him to retire. His cottage stood beyond the eastern wood, and Henry often visited him to hear stories about foxes and wounded birds. "Mrs. Finch sent word that you might be here," he said. "She was ordered away from the cottage before she could prepare it." "By whom?" "Lady Beatrice." Reed entered and placed bread, cheese, candles, and dry kindling on the table. He looked at Eleanor's soaked gown, but asked no humiliating questions. "Henry came to see me last week," he said. "He said the clock made him sleepy." Eleanor's hand tightened around the poker. What else did he tell you? That his aunt would not let him open the curtains after midnight. He also asked whether birds could smell danger before people did. Reed drew a folded paper from his coat. It was a child's drawing of the nursery, the bed, the tall clock, and 3 black lines curling from a small door in its base. Behind the clock, Henry had drawn a narrow passage leading into the wall. There is no passage there, Eleanor said. Not on the newer plans, Reed replied. But Blackthorn Hall was rebuilt after the infirmary fire. His late Grace ordered several service corridors sealed. Eleanor unfolded the drawing completely. Near the bottom, Henry had drawn Lady Beatrice, holding a green bottle. A spot of green wax marked the paper. Did you touch this? Eleanor asked. No. Who brought the drawing to you? Henry himself. That meant the wax had transferred from the child's fingers before Eleanor found the broken vial in his hand. Henry had been near the substance before his collapse. She moved toward the desk, but Reed caught sight of the open ledger. Those payments, he said slowly. I have seen that handwriting. They are signed by the steward. The name is his. The hand is not. Eleanor examined the entries again. The letters leaned left, neat and narrow. Beatrice wrote with the same controlled slant, but resemblance was not proof. The first payment contained something more useful. A notation reading, escapement adjusted, night interval extended. No ordinary repair required a night interval. Someone had altered the clock to activate at a fixed hour. Eleanor tore no pages from the ledger. Removing them would allow Beatrice to accuse her of tampering. Instead, she asked Reed to witness the book's condition, then wrapped it in oilcloth and locked it inside the desk. Will you take a message to Cedric? Reed asked. No, he must be told Henry is in danger. I told him while our son lay within reach of the clock. He chose not to hear me. The words hurt, but speaking them gave the pain a boundary. I will not return to Blackthorn Hall to beg for permission to protect my child. I will learn what the clock releases, how it enters Henry's room, and who is paying for it. Then Cedric may decide whether he wishes to face the truth privately or before every person who heard him condemn me. Reed inclined his head. What do you need? Access to the old infirmary. His face changed. That building did not burn by accident, he said. The servant blamed for the fire disappeared before he could be questioned. A floorboard creaked in the passage behind them. Eleanor turned sharply. The cottage door remained closed, but muddy water had begun spreading beneath the entrance to the study. Someone wearing wet boots was standing on the other side. Then the handle slowly turned. Reed raised the iron poker as the study door opened. A young woman stumbled inside, drenched from the rain. Her white cap hung loose over one ear, and blood darkened the sleeve of her grey dress. Clara. Eleanor dropped the poker and caught the nursery maid before she fell. Clara's skin was cold. A red mark circled her wrist, as though someone had seized her with considerable force. I came through the kitchen, she gasped. A man followed me from the hall. Reed closed the outer door, slid the bolt into place, and extinguished the lantern near the window. Did you see him? He asked. No, but I heard a horse behind me twice. Eleanor guided Clara to a chair. Where is Henry? Still asleep when I left. Lady Beatrice dismissed me after I refused to burn his nightshirt. Eleanor stopped. Where is it now? Clara reached beneath her cloak and withdrew a damp bundle tied with plain kitchen string. I hid it in the linen press. When Lady Beatrice ordered the servants to breakfast, I took it. Eleanor did not unfold the garment immediately. She carried it to the window, where the first grey light of morning entered through the rain. A faint yellow stain marked the collar, and black dust clung to one sleeve. Henry never touched the clock last night, Clara said. The dust should not be on him. No, it should not. Eleanor placed a fragment of bread near the stain. Within seconds, the soft white surface began turning brown. Reed stared. What does that mean? The substance reacts with moisture and air. Whatever was released into the nursery settled on Henry's clothes. She smelled the fabric without bringing it close to her face. Bitter almonds, singed metal, and something medicinal. Her father had once demonstrated a similar compound used to kill moths in sealed instrument cases. In small amounts, it caused headaches and confusion. In a closed room, heated repeatedly, it could produce convulsions, but she needed more than memory. She needed a sample no one could claim she had created. Clara, who saw you take this? No one. Then Beatrice will say I gave it to you. The maid's face fell. Eleanor untied the bundle and removed only one pearl button from the cuff. She placed it in a clean teacup, covered the cup with a saucer, and sealed the rim with candle wax. "The nightshirt must remain intact," she said. "Read, take Clara and the garment to Reverend Hale. Ask him to record the hour, its condition, and how it came into her possession. Do not tell him what I believe is on it." Reed nodded. A clergyman could not determine the substance, but his dated written account would make it far harder to replace or destroy the evidence later. Clara gripped Eleanor's hand. "There is something else. His Grace moved Lady Beatrice into your rooms this morning." The words found the one place Eleanor had tried to harden. Her rooms contained her father's tools, her correspondence, Henry's baby books, and the wooden music box Cedric had given her during their first winter as husband and wife. Beatrice now possessed all of it. "On whose authority?" Eleanor asked. "The Duke's." Lady Beatrice said she required a private sitting room near the nursery. By sending Eleanor away, Cedric had not merely removed Henry's mother, he had placed the nursery corridor, household keys, medicine chest, and Eleanor's belongings under Beatrice's control. The betrayal had given her exactly the access she needed. A heavy blow struck the front door. Clara flinched. "Open in the Duke's name," a man shouted. Reed looked toward the rear passage. "The kitchen door leads into the orchard." Eleanor did not move. Running would make her appear guilty, and the ledger would be discovered the moment the cottage was searched. "Take Clara out through the orchard," she said. "I will delay them. You cannot remain alone. I will not be alone for long if you reach Reverend Hale." Reed hesitated, then guided Clara toward the kitchen. Eleanor removed the nursery ledger from the desk and examined its binding. Her father had repaired hundreds of books for clients who stored mechanical drawings between their covers. She recognized the raised strip along the spine. The binding was hollow. Inside it lay 6 narrow receipts, each bearing the closed infirmary's crest and a delivery date matching one of Henry's attacks. The listed goods were harmless lamp oil, cleaning alcohol, clock springs, but every total had been doubled after the ink dried. At the bottom of the final receipt appeared a small imprint, not a signature, but the ridged edge of a brass thimble. Eleanor slipped the receipts beneath the loose insole of her shoe. She returned the ledger to the desk and unlocked the study door just as the front entrance burst open. Captain Morrow, Cedric's estate constable, entered with 2 men. "Your Grace," he said stiffly, "the Duke has ordered the return of any Blackthorn property removed without permission. I arrived with 1 trunk. We have information that a household ledger is here. Then search for it." Morrow looked surprised by her cooperation. He found the book almost immediately. "You opened this?" It was lying beneath a cloth. "This ledger belongs to the estate. So does the cottage. Your argument appears to be that I may live among my husband's neglected property, but must not look at it." One of the men concealed a smile. Morrow carried the ledger away, unaware that its hidden receipts now rested beneath Eleanor's foot. At Blackthorn Hall, Cedric stood beside Henry's bed, while the London physician examined the child. The clock had been restarted, and now ticked with perfect regularity. "No permanent injury," the physician said. "The attack may have resulted from nervous excitement. My wife's devices were found in his bed." "So," Lady Beatrice informed me. Cedric glanced toward the clock. "Would a damaged mechanism produce fumes?" "Not unless it contained something beyond gears and oil." Cedric walked across the room and touched the lower panel. It did not move. Behind him, Beatrice entered, carrying fresh medicine. "You should rest," she said. "I will remain with Henry." Cedric noticed a brass thimble on her finger, its edge cut into a distinctive pattern of tiny ridges. For an instant, he remembered seeing the same curved marks pressed into wax seals on the household receipts Eleanor had once asked him to examine. He had told her the matter was too small to deserve his time. "Were you in Eleanor's rooms last night?" he asked. Beatrice smiled. "I was searching for whatever she used against Henry." It was not an answer, but Cedric allowed it to become one. He left the nursery without opening the clock. Beatrice waited until his footsteps faded. Then she locked the door, removed a tiny green vial from the medicine chest, and knelt before the clock. When she opened its lower panel, she discovered that one brass fragment was missing. Her composure vanished. "Henry," she said softly, turning toward the bed. "What did you give your mother?" The boy kept his eyes closed. Beatrice grasped his shoulder. What did she take? Henry said nothing. A servant knocked and announced that Captain Morrow had recovered the cottage ledger, but Duchess Eleanor had surrendered it without resistance. Beatrice looked at the clock. Then, at the child. Eleanor had never surrendered anything without first understanding its value. Send someone back to Briar Cottage, she ordered. Search her shoes. Eleanor heard the rider before she saw him. Hoofbeats cut across the orchard. Too fast for a messenger, and too deliberate for a traveller seeking shelter. She removed the receipts from beneath her insole, folded them into the smallest possible square, and pushed them inside the hollow handle of her father's screwdriver. By the time the second search party reached Briar Cottage, she was seated beside the cold fireplace, with both shoes neatly placed before her. Captain Morrow's deputy entered without removing his wet hat. We were instructed to conduct a further search. Of what? Your clothing and personal effects. Eleanor looked at the two male servants behind him. You intend to search the Duchess of Blackthorn's person without a female attendant? The deputy's confidence weakened. Even Cedric's order could not protect him from the scandal that would follow such an intrusion. We will search your shoes. You are welcome to them. He examined the heels, soles, and lining. Finding nothing, he turned his attention to her trunk. The men unfolded every gown, shook out every stocking, and opened the small wooden case containing her father's tools. The deputy lifted the screwdriver, but saw nothing unusual in its worn ivory handle. When they finally departed, Eleanor waited until the hoofbeats disappeared. Reed entered through the kitchen minutes later. Clara and the nightshirt are safe with Reverend Hale, he said. He has written a statement and sealed the garment inside a chest. Eleanor retrieved the receipts. Now we need to learn who supplied these goods. The closed infirmary stood less than 2 miles away, beyond a neglected section of the estate, where yew trees crowded the old carriage road. Its roof had partially collapsed, and soot still stained the stone above the windows. A rusted chain secured the front doors. Reed reached for an axe, but Eleanor stopped him. If we break it, Beatrice will know someone entered. She studied the padlock. Its face bore the mark of Bell and Wren, the same workshop where her father had trained as a young man. The design contained a weakness. Pressure applied against the third internal lever caused the bolt to release without scratching the casing. Eleanor selected a narrow pick from her tool roll. The lock opened in less than a minute. Inside, charred shelves leaned against damp walls. Broken bottles covered the floor, but the dust had been disturbed by fresh boot prints. Someone had recently walked from the entrance to a cabinet at the rear. The cabinet appeared empty. Eleanor pressed its warped doors, listening to the sound. The left side rang hollow. The right produced a duller note. She removed 2 screws and discovered a hidden compartment lined with tin. Inside were 12 green glass vials. 11 remained sealed. 1 was empty. Reed whispered a curse. Eleanor compared the broken neck Henry had given her with an intact vial. The glass color, thickness, and wax were identical. A paper label on each bottle read, "Fumigating compound, for instrument cases only." Beneath it was a warning never to heat the substance in an occupied room. That proves what made Henry ill, Reed said. It proves the substance exists. It does not yet prove who placed it in the clock. A sound came from outside. Eleanor extinguished their lantern and pulled Reed behind the ruined partition. Through a gap in the boards, she saw the estate physician enter with Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper. Mrs. Finch was crying. "I followed your instructions," the physician said. "I described the attacks as nervous illness, but the boy is growing weaker. You were paid to delay questions, not kill him." "I did not know Lady Beatrice intended repeated doses." Eleanor felt Reed tense beside her. The physician opened the cabinet and froze. "Someone has moved the vials." Mrs. Finch looked toward the disturbed screws. "We must warn the Duke." "You will do no such thing." He signed the separation order. "If this is exposed now, he will claim we conspired against his heir." "Did we not?" The physician seized her arm. "I treated a sick child. You carried messages. Lady Beatrice, alone, controlled the clock." Eleanor shifted closer to hear, and a burned floorboard cracked beneath her foot. The physician turned. "Who is there?" Reed stepped from hiding first, drawing attention away from Eleanor. The physician lunged at him, but Eleanor reached the cabinet and seized one sealed vial. Mrs. Finch blocked the exit. "Give it to me," she pleaded. "If Lady Beatrice discovers I spoke, She will dismiss my daughters from the estate cottages. Eleanor could have pushed past her. Instead, she placed the vial on the floor between them. If you return that bottle to Beatrice, Henry may die. If you allow me to take it, your family may lose their home. I will not pretend your choice costs nothing. Mrs. Finch's face crumpled. Eleanor removed her wedding ring and pressed it into the woman's palm. This will pay for lodgings until I can restore what is owed to you. It was the last valuable object Eleanor controlled, without Cedric's permission. Mrs. Finch closed her hand around it and stepped aside. The physician grabbed for the vial. Reed struck his wrist with his walking stick, sending him into a charred shelf. Eleanor caught the bottle before it hit the floor. Reverend Hale has Henry's nightshirt, she told the physician. If anything happens to the child, the substance on that cloth will be examined. His face drained of color. The threat gave them time to leave. By afternoon, the physician arrived at Blackthorn Hall with a different account. He told Cedric that Eleanor had broken into the old infirmary, attacked him, and stolen a dangerous compound. Beatrice stood beside her brother as he listened. She created the very evidence she intends to use, Beatrice said. Now she will claim it came from Henry's room. Cedric's anger returned, but not with its former certainty. Why was the compound still stored there 8 years after the fire? The physician hesitated. It may have been overlooked. And why were you there today? Mrs. Finch reported signs of trespass. Cedric looked toward the housekeeper. She kept her fist closed around something hidden in her palm. Before she could answer, Beatrice announced that Eleanor's former rooms had been searched. Inside the tool cabinet, servants had discovered 3 more green vials. Cedric stared at them on his desk. It was compelling evidence, almost too compelling. Eleanor guarded her tools obsessively. She never stored chemicals beside untreated metals, and she labeled even common oil. He picked up one vial. A smear of fresh dust covered its base, but the shelf from which it had supposedly been taken had been cleaned that morning. For the second time, he was given a chance to verify the truth. "Bring me Eleanor's tool cabinet," he ordered, "and summon every servant who claims to have seen those bottles inside it." The servants assembled in Cedric's study before dusk. Eleanor's tool cabinet rested on the desk beside the 3 green vials. Cedric questioned the footman first. "Was the cabinet locked when you carried it downstairs?" "Yes, Your Grace." The maid beside him shook her head. "No, Your Grace. It was already open when I found the bottles." Cedric turned to Captain Morrow. "Which of them is telling the truth?" Morrow hesitated. "I cannot be certain." Cedric examined the brass keyhole. There were no scratches or signs of forced entry, though Eleanor alone possessed its key. "Then who opened it?" No one answered. Beatrice stepped away from the window. "Must you treat the entire household like criminals because Eleanor refuses to accept responsibility?" The bottles were found among her possessions. Cedric lifted one of the vials. They were supposedly found on a shelf, cleaned this morning, inside a locked cabinet that no witness can explain opening. The maid began to cry. Beatrice immediately placed herself between the girl and Cedric. "Your wife has always known how to frighten servants into doubting what they saw. That is how she controlled this house." Cedric looked around the room. The servants did not appear controlled by Eleanor. They appeared terrified of Beatrice. He dismissed everyone except Mrs. Finch. "You wish to say something?" he asked. The housekeeper's eyes moved toward Beatrice. "Only that Her Grace never stored chemicals beside her tools." "You told the physician that she broke into the infirmary," Beatrice said. "I said she entered it. I never said the compound belonged to her." Cedric stepped closer. "Did you see my wife place these bottles inside her cabinet?" Mrs. Finch slowly opened her hand. Eleanor's wedding ring rested in her palm. Cedric recognized the fine marks around its inner edge, the scratches Eleanor had made years earlier while using the ring to measure a missing washer in one of her father's clocks. "Where did you get that?" "Her Grace gave it to me." "In exchange for what?" Beatrice demanded. Mrs. Finch lowered her head. "For helping her leave the infirmary." Beatrice seized upon the answer. "Then Eleanor bribed a servant after stealing poison. What further proof do you require?" Cedric stared at the ring. Eleanor had kept it when he expelled her. She would never have surrendered it lightly. But Mrs. Finch's frightened silence allowed Beatrice to turn an act of protection into evidence of guilt. At Briar Cottage, Eleanor placed the sealed vial inside a wooden box lined with wool. Reverend Hale had agreed to carry it and Henry's nightshirt to an apothecary in York whose reputation did not depend upon the Blackthorn family. The journey would take 2 days. Until then, Eleanor had no proof strong enough to force entry into the nursery. She sat at the dusty desk with Henry's drawing before her, tracing the narrow passage he had placed behind the clock. If the service corridor survived the fire, it may connect the nursery to the old infirmary, Reed said. Too far, Eleanor replied. But it could connect to a ventilation shaft built from the same plans. She turned the drawing over. A series of small circles covered the back, linked by lines like the teeth of gears. At first she assumed they were a child's decoration. Then she counted them. 12 large circles and 1 small one. The nursery clock had struck 13 times before the hidden panel opened. Henry had not merely drawn what he saw, he had recorded the sequence. Eleanor arranged 12 buttons around the table and moved a 13th through the pattern. On the 4th attempt, she understood it. The ordinary clock face concealed a second timing wheel. Each midnight cycle advanced the hidden wheel by 1 position, releasing a measured quantity of compound. It was designed not to kill quickly, but to make Henry repeatedly ill. Why? Reed asked. A dead heir would bring immediate scrutiny, Eleanor said. A weak heir can be placed under guardianship. The meeting Beatrice had mentioned was not routine. Someone intended to have Henry declared incapable of inheriting under his father's direct care. Beatrice was creating the illness she would use to claim authority over him. A carriage arrived outside before Eleanor could say more. Cedric entered without announcement, bringing Captain Morrow and a formal document bearing his seal. His gaze fell upon the empty place on Eleanor's left hand, and something shifted in his face. You gave our wedding ring to Mrs. Finch. I gave a frightened woman the means to keep her daughters housed after your sister threatened their security. She says you paid her to help you steal poison. She said no such thing. Beatrice gave her silence a convenient meaning. Cedric placed the document on the desk. It was an order barring Eleanor from Blackthorn Hall, Henry's attendants, and every property containing estate records. Any attempt to enter would permit Morrow to detain her until a magistrate reviewed the accusation of attempted poisoning. Eleanor read it twice. You found contradictions in the search, or you would not have come yourself. I found questions. I also found my wife carrying a substance capable of harming our son, a substance I removed from the place where your sister's physician stored it. You broke into that building because you refused to open a clock. Cedric's voice dropped. Give me the vial, surrender your tools, and remain here until the physician completes his inquiry. The same physician who lied about Henry's attacks. You have no proof of that. Eleanor looked at the document, then at the man who had once trusted her hands enough to place his father's broken watch in them. You know the bottles were planted. You know Beatrice lied about opening my cabinet. You know Henry named her. If you sign this, after knowing all of that, you are not being deceived. Cedric, you are choosing the lie, because the truth would embarrass you. Morrow looked away. Cedric's hand tightened around his pen. He could have delayed. He could have demanded an independent examination. Instead, pride made the decision that evidence had failed to make for him. He signed the order. Eleanor did not beg. She placed the vial box in Reverend Hale's satchel and handed over her remaining tools, except for the screwdriver containing the hidden receipts. You may take the instruments, she said. You will not take the evidence entrusted to the church. Cedric could not search a clergyman without creating the very scandal he feared. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, he understood that she had stopped trying to save their marriage. If Henry suffers another attack, she said, his blood will not be upon the person you expelled. It will be upon every person you chose to leave beside him. Cedric departed with her tools and the signed order. Before his carriage reached Blackthorn Hall, Beatrice used the authority his signature had strengthened. She dismissed Clara, confined Mrs. Finch to her room, and ordered the nursery clock moved to the estate chapel before the guardianship committee arrived. But when the servants lifted the clock away from the wall, they uncovered a narrow iron vent. Warm air still flowed through it from somewhere below. In the nursery, Henry awakened coughing as black dust drifted from the opening. In the chapel cellar, a hidden furnace had already been lit, and beside it stood enough green vials to poison every witness expected at the guardianship hearing. The first warning came when a kitchen maid collapsed while arranging chairs in the estate chapel. A footman carried her into the courtyard, blaming hunger, but within minutes, 2 more servants staggered outside, complaining of dizziness and a bitter taste in their mouths. Black dust had begun collecting along the chapel vents. Cedric arrived as the steward ordering the doors opened. "Where is Henry?" he demanded. Beatrice descended the steps, with one arm around the boy's shoulders. Henry could barely stand. "I moved him here because the committee insisted upon seeing him in a consecrated place," she said. Then the servants began performing this spectacle. Cedric lifted his son and immediately smelled the same bitter sweetness that had clung to the nursery. Henry's eyes rolled back, his body stiffened in Cedric's arms, and every explanation Beatrice had offered suddenly collapsed beneath the child's weight. "Fetch the physician," Cedric shouted. "He has gone to York," the steward replied. "He left before dawn." Beatrice insisted the cold air had triggered another attack, but Cedric looked toward the blackened vent and remembered Eleanor's demand. "Open the clock." He carried Henry outside, laid him upon the grass, and ordered the entire chapel evacuated. A member of the guardianship committee had already arrived at the gate. He watched servants stumble into the courtyard and saw the air convulsing beneath his father's coat. By noon, word had spread that the Duke of Blackthorn could not keep his own son or household safe. At Briar Cottage, Eleanor saw the chapel bell being rung in the emergency pattern, 3 rapid peals, followed by silence. The sound had not been used since the infirmary fire. She was still barred from every Blackthorn property, and Cedric's signed order allowed Morrow to detain her if she crossed the boundary. Reed saddled his horse anyway. "I will learn what happened. There is no time." Eleanor unfolded Henry's drawing and studied the circles again. The hidden timing wheel had been moved with the clock, but the substance now drifting through the chapel could not have come from the same small chamber. Beatrice had enlarged the mechanism. If the chapel furnace heated a reservoir beneath the floor, opening the doors would not stop the fumes. The rising air would continue carrying them through every vent until the fire died. "There is an old coal tunnel beneath the east wall," Reed said. "Sealed after the fire." "Not sealed," Eleanor replied. "Hidden." She removed the receipts from the screwdriver handle. One listed 12 feet of copper tubing as clock springs. Another recorded a new iron grate as lamp oil. Those doubled totals were not merely stolen money. They concealed the materials used to connect the infirmary passages to the chapel furnace. Eleanor rode toward the estate, with Reverend Hale's satchel strapped across her back. Captain Morrow met her at the bridge and held up the order bearing Cedric's signature. "You cannot cross. The chapel is filling with poisonous vapor." His Grace ordered an evacuation. "Evacuation will not extinguish the furnace beneath it." Morrow's expression changed, but he did not lower his arm. "I am bound by the order." Eleanor drew the sealed vial from the satchel and placed it on the stone parapet between them. "Break this, and within minutes you may feel what the servants are suffering, or move aside and let me stop a larger quantity from reaching Henry." Morrow looked at the bottle, then at the chapel tower, visible beyond the trees. "If I disobey, I lose my position. If you obey blindly, others may lose their lives." He stepped aside, but warned that he could give her only 15 minutes before the committee's guards arrived. Eleanor crossed the bridge, knowing Cedric might have her arrested in front of the entire estate. She did not enter the chapel. Instead, she followed the outer wall until she found a line of dead moss beneath a carved stone angel. Warm vapor escaped between the stones. Reed struck the mortar with an abandoned garden hammer, while Eleanor used her one hidden screwdriver to loosen the iron pins. Behind the slab lay a narrow tunnel, descending toward an orange glow. The air burned Eleanor's throat the instant she entered. She wrapped a wet strip of her petticoat around her mouth and crawled forward. At the bottom, she found a furnace fitted with copper tubes leading upward. Beside it stood a rack that could hold 12 vials. 9 were empty. 3 remained above the flame, their wax seals beginning to soften. Eleanor could not safely remove them. Heated glass might burst in her hands. She examined the furnace damper. Its latch had been altered with a reverse-threaded screw, designed to resist anyone turning it in the ordinary direction. That small arrogance betrayed the maker. Beatrice had copied a technique from Eleanor's notebooks, without understanding why Eleanor used it only on delicate music boxes. Working backward, Eleanor released the damper and smothered the flame with ash. 1 vial cracked as the metal. They escaped into the open air, coughing, their clothes streaked with soot, just as Cedric reached the east wall, carrying Henry. For a moment, Husband and wife faced one another across the broken entrance. Henry lay limp against Cedric's shoulder. Eleanor forgot the order, the witnesses, and the humiliation. She took her son, loosened his collar, and kept his head elevated, while Reverend Hale brought clean water. Henry's breathing gradually steadied. Cedric knelt beside them, his hands blackened from the chapel floor. You knew where the furnace was. I followed the materials hidden in your accounts. The accounts I allowed Beatrice to control after I expelled you. Eleanor did not soften the truth for him. Yes, behind Cedric, committee members examined the unconscious servants and the blackened vents. Their chairman announced that the guardianship hearing could no longer be postponed. In light of Henry's repeated illnesses, Cedric's public accusation against his wife, and the poisoning of witnesses on Blackthorn property, temporary supervision of the heir would be considered at noon the following day. Until then, Henry was to remain under guard in a neutral room. Cedric objected, but the chairman reminded him that his own signed order named Eleanor a danger while leaving Beatrice in authority. He had created the record now being used against him. Beatrice appeared in the courtyard, with tears on her face. Eleanor did this, she cried. She entered the forbidden tunnel carrying the same poison she stole. The physician's written accusation had already been delivered to the committee, and Cedric's signature confirmed that Eleanor had been barred for possessing the compound. Several men turned toward her with suspicion. Eleanor could save herself by surrendering the sealed vial and explaining everything immediately, but doing so would reveal that Reverend Hale held Henry's nightshirt before the apothecary had examined it. Beatrice would know which evidence to destroy and which witness to silence. Eleanor therefore made a more dangerous choice. "Detain me if you must," she said, giving Henry back to Cedric, "but remove every child and servant from the chapel wing, seal the vents, and place guards at the old infirmary." The chairman ordered Morrow to escort her to Briar Cottage under watch until the hearing. Cedric tried to intervene, but the document he had signed left him no credible ground to defend her without admitting his own accusation had been reckless. As Eleanor was led away, Henry regained consciousness and caught his father's sleeve. "Mother stopped it," he whispered. Cedric watched her disappear beyond the bridge, while servants carried the poison from his chapel and strangers assumed authority over his son. His reputation, household command, and claim to unquestioned guardianship had all begun to fall, not because Eleanor had opposed him, but because he had signed away the only person who understood the danger. Then Mrs. Finch broke free from Beatrice's supervision and ran into the courtyard. "Your Grace," she cried, "Lady Beatrice has ordered the old infirmary burned tonight." Cedric turned toward the distant yew trees. A thin column of smoke was already rising above them. The apothecary's examination would arrive the next day, but the original supply, hidden records, and perhaps the passage linking Beatrice to the scheme could be destroyed within the hour. Cedric reached the infirmary before the roof caught fire. Flames had already climbed the rear wall, but the rain kept them low enough for Captain Morrow and several tenants to form a line from the well. Beatrice was nowhere in sight. Her groom claimed that a fallen lantern had caused the blaze, though there had been no reason for anyone to carry a lantern into an abandoned building during daylight. Cedric entered through the broken front doors and found the concealed cabinet standing open. The green vials were gone. So were the labels, delivery boxes, and every object that might explain how the compound had reached Henry's clock. Near the hidden compartment, however, one area of soot had been wiped away by a woman's gloved hand. Beneath it appeared a name scratched into the tin lining: Edmund Vale. Cedric remembered the man only vaguely, a young infirmary servant accused of causing the fire 8 years earlier. His father had declared him guilty without a hearing, and Vale had disappeared before he could be questioned. At the time, Cedric had accepted the family account because examining it would have delayed his inheritance proceedings. He now recognized the pattern with sickening clarity. Blackthorn men had always found accusation more convenient than investigation. Eleanor remained under guard at Briar Cottage, but the arrangement unexpectedly gave her something she had never possessed: at Blackthorn Hall, a place Beatrice could not enter without witnesses. Reverend Hale returned shortly after nightfall with the York apothecary, Mr. Bell. He brought a signed examination recording that the substance on Henry's nightshirt matched the sealed green vial. When heated, it released a vapor capable of causing dizziness, confusion, tremors, and eventually death. The concentration on the cloth proved Henry had been repeatedly exposed. Clara's testimony, Reverend Hale's custody statement, and Bell's chemical examination, now formed a chain Beatrice could not dismiss as Eleanor's invention. Yet none of it proved who had installed the mechanism. The empty vials may be destroyed by morning, Bell warned. Then we prove the system rather than chase the bottles, Eleanor said. She placed Henry's drawing, the hidden receipts, and the brass fragment side by side. The fragment contained a semicircular groove too shallow to be part of the clock's ordinary movement. When aligned with the circles Henry had drawn, it formed a rotating measure that released one dose during each 13th strike. The receipts supplied the copper tubes and iron grate. The nightshirt proved what traveled through them. What remained missing was the person who built the mechanism. Reed studied the name Cedric had sent from the infirmary. Edmund Vale did not disappear, he said at last. Your father helped him escape. Eleanor looked up sharply. Reed explained that Vale had been a gifted apprentice employed to maintain medical instruments. After the original fire, the late Duke accused him publicly, but secretly provided money for passage to Scotland. Why condemn him and then save him? Eleanor asked. Because Vale knew the fire began in a locked medicine room used by Lady Beatrice. She was 17 and experimenting with fumigating compounds to preserve her late mother's gowns. The Duke protected his daughter's name by sacrificing the apprentices. The truth gave Beatrice both knowledge and motive. She had learned how the old ventilation system worked, and she had grown up believing Blackthorn's authority could make any accusation true. But Reed had more. Vale had returned under another name, and now repaired agricultural machinery in a village 12 miles away. He had visited Reed the previous winter, after recognizing an order for copper tubing written in Beatrice's hand. Afraid of being blamed again, he had kept the original order. Cedric arrived at Briar Cottage near midnight without guards or ducal ceremony. Soot covered his coat, and a burn reddened one hand. Eleanor met him in the study, but did not invite him to sit. The infirmary was deliberately burned, he said. I found Vale's name. We know where he is. Cedric looked from Reverend Hale to the apothecary, then to the evidence arranged across the table. Only then did he understand how much Eleanor had accomplished after he deprived her of her home, tools, servants, money, and access to Henry. You built all of this in one day. No, I built it during every year you believed the estate held itself together. She showed him the receipts and explained the hidden timing wheel. Cedric recognized his own authorization at the bottom of the first payment. Beatrice had placed the request among repairs he signed without reading. When Eleanor had asked him to review the unusual seals months earlier, he had dismissed the matter as household trivia. His negligence had paid for the mechanism poisoning his son. I gave her the accounts, he said. I placed her beside Henry. I signed the order that kept you away. Yes, Eleanor offered him no comforting lie. Tell me what I must do. First, stop speaking as though obedience now can erase authority misused before. Second, remove Beatrice from the nursery and place Henry with Clara under Reverend Hale's supervision. Third, publicly suspend the accusation against me before tomorrow's hearing. Cedric's face tightened. If I withdraw it without presenting the culprit, the committee will say, I accused you recklessly and then reversed myself to protect the family. That would be true. He absorbed the answer in silence. And after that, you will help us bring Edmund Vale safely to the hearing. You will not question him alone, threaten him, purchase his silence, or decide which part of his account the Blackthorn name can endure. Cedric nodded. It was the first agreement between them, in which he possessed no right to set the terms. They rode before dawn in separate carriages. Vale lived behind a watermill, working from a stone shed filled with gears, plough fittings, and broken tools. He was older than Eleanor expected, with a scar crossing one side of his neck from the infirmary fire. At first, he refused to open the door when he saw Cedric. Eleanor stepped forward alone. I am not asking you to rescue the Duke, she said. I am asking you to help protect a child from the same woman whose secret cost you your name. Vale admitted that Beatrice had commissioned the hidden timing mechanism under the pretense of treating woodworm in the nursery clock. When he realized the measured vapor would enter an occupied room, he refused to finish it. Beatrice threatened to revive the old arson charge, so he surrendered the incomplete pieces, but retained her signed design order. She hired another man to assemble it, he said, a foreign mechanic working under the estate physician. He opened an iron cash box and removed the order, wrapped in oilskin. The paper bore Beatrice's signature. the dimensions of the nursery vent, and an instruction that the device activate only after the curtains were closed. Reverend Hale read the document aloud while Bell examined the ink and seal. Vale agreed to testify if the old accusation against him was formally withdrawn before he entered Blackthorn property. Cedric wrote the retraction himself, naming his father's concealment and his own failure to correct it. He surrendered the paper to Hale for safekeeping, then placed Beatrice's order inside the cash box with the witness statements. For the first time, their proof linked motive, mechanism, material, access, and victim. Eleanor allowed herself one breath of relief. It did not last. A crash sounded outside. Smoke rolled beneath the workshop door as burning straw was pushed against it. Vale ran toward the rear window, but it had been nailed shut from outside. Cedric threw his shoulder against the door, while Reed tried to smother the flames. Through a widening gap in the smoke, Eleanor saw a rider seize the iron cash box from their carriage. The rider turned just enough for her to recognize the estate physician. He spurred toward Blackthorn Hall, carrying the only signed order that directly connected Beatrice to the clock. Cedric broke through the workshop door as flames climbed the frame. He dragged Eleanor into the yard, then returned for Vale, while Reed and Reverend Hale beat the burning straw apart with their coats. The physician had vanished down the northern road with the cash box, but Captain Morrow found the horse abandoned near Blackthorn Wood less than an hour later. Its saddle was empty, the box lay smashed beside the stream, and Beatrice's signed order had been reduced to wet ash. Vale's testimony remained, but without the document, she could portray him as a disgraced servant, seeking revenge against the family that had once accused him. Worse, the retraction Cedric had written was gone with it. By the time they reached Blackthorn Hall, Beatrice had already moved against them. She stood before the guardianship committee, with the estate physician beside her, and presented a carefully prepared story. Eleanor, furious over being separated from Henry, had stolen poison, recruited Vale to invent a false mechanism, and tried to burn his workshop when he threatened to confess. The physician displayed burns on his sleeve and claimed he had risked his life retrieving records from the fire. Duchess Eleanor has manipulated every frightened servant in this house, Beatrice said. She even surrendered her wedding ring as payment for their lies. Mrs. Finch was brought forward. Terror made her voice unsteady, and Beatrice used every hesitation as proof of deception. Clara was accused of stealing Henry's nightshirt after Eleanor had contaminated it. Reverend Hale's custody statement was challenged because he had received the garment from a dismissed servant. Mr. Bell's examination proved the presence of poison, but not the person who had applied it. Vale admitted constructing part of the device, yet Beatrice produced the old arson accusation, bearing the late Duke's seal. Within minutes, she transformed every witness into either a criminal or Eleanor's accomplice. Then, the physician placed a leather notebook on the committee table. It contained drawings of the nursery clock in Eleanor's hand, including the reverse-threaded damper and hidden timing wheel. The pages had been taken from her rooms after Cedric gave Beatrice access to them. "These are my designs for a music box that played 13 notes," Eleanor said. "The measurements have been added by someone else." Beatrice opened to a page bearing Eleanor's initials beneath the altered plan. Again, the initials were backward. But before Eleanor could point it out, the committee chairman announced that too many disputed claims surrounded the evidence. Until an independent inquiry concluded, Henry would be removed from both parents and placed under Beatrice's supervision as his nearest adult relative, with no formal accusation against her. "No," Cedric said. The chairman reminded him that his own signed order named Eleanor as the danger and Beatrice as the responsible guardian. Cedric could preserve his standing by remaining silent. If he contradicted his own declaration, he would publicly establish that he had endangered the heir through negligence and false accusation. He looked toward Henry, who stood beside Clara under guard, then toward Eleanor. She neither begged him nor offered absolution. For once, the choice could not be made for appearance. Cedric stepped before the committee. "My order against Duchess Eleanor was issued without a fair examination. I knew the evidence contained contradictions. My son, named Lady Beatrice. The tool cabinet had been opened without its key, and my wife asked only that I inspect the clock. I refused because I feared scandal more than I feared being wrong." A stunned silence followed. Beatrice's face lost its carefully arranged sorrow. Cedric continued, "I transferred the household accounts to my sister. I authorized payments I did not read. I gave her Eleanor's rooms, access to her notebooks, and control of Henry's attendance. Every opportunity used in this crime was created or enlarged by my decisions. If the committee considers me unfit for temporary guardianship because of that admission, I will accept it. But it will not place my son with the woman who benefited from his illness. The confession cost him immediately. The committee suspended Cedric's sole authority over Henry and ordered the estate accounts sealed. A royal magistrate would be notified, and Cedric's position on the county council would remain inactive until the inquiry ended. Yet the chairman also refused to grant Beatrice guardianship. Henry would stay with Reverend Hale and Clara under committee protection until the following day, when all parties would present final evidence at a public estate hearing. Beatrice appeared wounded rather than defeated. Without her signed order, the case against her still relied upon hostile testimony and mechanisms anyone might have copied from Eleanor's notebook. As the room emptied, she leaned close to Eleanor. By tomorrow, they will remember that you brought poison onto the estate and that your husband called you guilty before anyone else did, Eleanor answered quietly. And they will remember you needed a sick child to feel powerful. For the first time, Beatrice struck her. Cedric caught his sister's wrist before she could do it again. Beatrice stared at him, shocked that the brother who had protected her name all his life had finally restrained her in public. That night, Eleanor visited Henry in Reverend Hale's rooms. She did not question him about Beatrice or the clock. She sat beside him and repaired a small wooden bird with one of Vale's borrowed tools. When its wings began to move again, Henry smiled for the first time since her expulsion. "I tried to remember the circles," he said. "You remembered perfectly. Did Aunt Beatrice draw them?" "No. She told the doctor which hole to fill. She said the smallest circle must always face the window." Eleanor's hand stopped. The groove on Henry's brass fragment had seemed designed to measure liquid, but a measuring cup did not need to face a window. She pictured the fragment again, curved, polished on one edge, blackened on the other. It was not merely a dosing wheel. It was part of a rotating mirror. At midnight, it aligned with light entering through a narrow opening and signaled the person in the passage that the curtains were closed. The mechanism required someone to stand outside the nursery and observe the reflected flash before releasing the compound. Beatrice could deny designing the clock, but she could not deny knowledge of a signal that had never appeared in Eleanor's notebook. Eleanor returned to the sealed nursery with Morrow, Cedric, Hale, and the committee chairman as witnesses. The clock had been moved, yet a faint square of clean wood remained on the wall behind it. At the center was a hole no wider than a needle. Eleanor inserted the brass fragment and turned its polished edge toward the window. A sharp point of light appeared inside the old service corridor. On the opposite wall, someone had scratched 13 short lines into the plaster, one for each successful release. Beneath them was a fresh green thread caught on a nail, matching Beatrice's gown from the night Henry nearly died. Useful, but still removable and open to dispute. Eleanor needed proof Beatrice could create with her own words in front of witnesses. She studied the hidden mirror, then closed the panel and told Morrow to return the clock to the chapel before morning. "At the hearing," Cedric said, "she will deny knowing how it works." Eleanor looked toward the narrow hole in the wall. "Then we will not ask her how it works. We will show her a mechanism assembled incorrectly and let her tell us exactly how to fix it." By 10 the following morning, the estate chapel had been cleared of smoke and opened for the public hearing. Tenants filled the rear benches, servants stood along the walls, and members of the guardianship committee occupied a long table beneath the eastern window. The nursery clock stood in the center aisle, its walnut case scarred from being moved and its hands fixed at midnight. Before anyone arrived, Eleanor had protected what remained of the evidence. Reverend Hale held the apothecary's report and the custody statements. Captain Morrow guarded the sealed nightshirt. Edmund Vale waited in an adjoining room, so Beatrice could not intimidate him or tailor her account to his. Reed had copied the hidden receipts, word for word, in front of 3 witnesses, while the originals remained concealed inside Eleanor's screwdriver. The clock itself had been examined and reassembled under the committee chairman's observation, but Eleanor had deliberately reversed the polished brass fragment and shifted the hidden timing wheel by 1 position. Beatrice entered, wearing a black gown instead of green, as if she were already mourning a family destroyed by Eleanor. She attacked first. "My brother has admitted that he failed to govern his household," she told the committee. "His wife exploited that weakness. Duchess Eleanor designed the concealed mechanism, poisoned her own son in small amounts, and then staged a rescue to restore the influence she feared she was losing." A murmur moved through the chapel. The accusation was monstrous, but it possessed the simplicity Beatrice needed. Eleanor had the skill, the drawings, and access to Henry before her expulsion. The physician supported her claim, insisting that Eleanor had asked him months earlier how fumes travelled through enclosed rooms. Eleanor remembered the conversation. Henry had been coughing during winter, and she had asked whether the blocked nursery chimney required cleaning. A mother's concern had been reshaped into preparation for murder. Beatrice then produced the 3 vials found in Eleanor's cabinet and the notebook taken from her rooms. "Everything leads to her," she said. "The only evidence against me comes from servants she bribed, an apprentice my father condemned, and a child too ill to understand what he saw." When the chairman invited Eleanor to answer, she did not begin with Beatrice. She began with the clock. She asked Mr. Bell to explain what the substance did when heated. Then Clara described finding Henry after each midnight exposure. Reverend Hale confirmed the nightshirt had remained sealed from the moment he received it, and Bell stated that the residue matched the intact vial removed from the infirmary. Vale entered and identified the reverse-threaded damper as his workmanship. He admitted constructing the unfinished release chamber, but denied designing the signalling mirror or connecting the copper tubes. "Lady Beatrice gave me the dimensions," he said. "When I refused to finish it, she threatened me with the old fire charge." Beatrice laughed softly. "How convenient that the document proving this claim was destroyed," Eleanor agreed. "A missing document cannot convict anyone. That is why I will not ask the committee to rely upon it." She placed the 6 original receipts on the table. The physician's expression changed. Each receipt corresponded to material found beneath the chapel. Copper tubing, disguised as springs, an iron grate listed as lamp oil, and green glass charged as cleaning alcohol. Mrs. Finch identified the ridged imprint left by Beatrice's thimble. Beatrice removed the thimble from her finger and declared that hundreds of women owned similar ones. "Precisely," Eleanor said. "The impression supports the chain, but it does not complete it." She next opened her notebook to the altered drawings. "These music box plans are mine. The measurements were added later, and the initials beneath them were copied backward from the reflection in my tool cabinet's mirror." Cedric confirmed that Eleanor always marked her work on the inner surface, where the initials appeared correctly when the lid was open. Captain Morrow testified that the cabinet showed no forced entry and that no witness could explain how it had been unlocked. The maid who claimed to have found the vials began sobbing. Under questioning, she admitted Beatrice had handed her a key and ordered her to say the cabinet was already open. Beatrice immediately blamed the physician, saying he had supplied the bottles and misled everyone about their purpose. The physician turned upon her. "You ordered the clock moved to the chapel. You told me the larger furnace would only frighten the committee into declaring the boy delicate." "A lie from a man desperate to save himself," Beatrice replied. Their alliance fractured in full view of the household, yet accusation alone still did not establish who had operated the mechanism. Eleanor walked into the center aisle and opened the lower clock panel. The release could not occur merely because the hands reached midnight. Someone had to receive a reflected signal confirming that Henry's curtains were closed, then activate the vapor from the service passage. She inserted the brass fragment. Because she had reversed it, the polished edge faced inward and produced no flash in the corridor. She turned the hidden wheel. Nothing happened. "This is the mechanism recovered from Henry's hand. Mr. Vale has been unable to make it operate. My husband could not operate it. Captain Morrow could not. If I designed it, as Lady Beatrice claims, perhaps she can explain why my device fails." Beatrice remained seated. "I know nothing about your contraption. Then you cannot help us." "No." Eleanor closed the panel and deliberately turned the fragment farther in the wrong direction. "The mirror must face east, but this piece appears too short. Perhaps Henry broke off another section." Beatrice's gaze snapped toward the window. "It does not face east." The chapel became utterly still. Beatrice realized her mistake and tried to recover. "Anyone can see the window is south of the clock." Eleanor stepped away from the mechanism. "I did not ask which window it faced. You said east. I gave you an incorrect direction. The signal opening is north, behind the clock, hidden by the wooden backboard. It cannot be seen from where you are sitting. Beatrice rose. I heard the boy describe it. Henry never knew the direction. He called it the smallest circle facing the window. Only the person standing inside the passage could know which opening received the reflected light. Beatrice pointed at the notebook. The altered measurements show it. They show the release chamber, not the mirror. Whoever forged those pages did not include the signal because she believed the missing fragment had been destroyed. The chairman ordered Morrow to prevent Beatrice and the physician from leaving. Eleanor then asked Vale to rotate the brass fragment into its true position. A point of reflected light appeared through the hidden opening and struck the chapel's north wall. 13 scratched lines became visible beside the vent. Gasps rose from the benches. Beatrice's face had gone white, but she had one defense remaining. She insisted that Eleanor had placed the scratches and green thread inside the corridor after returning to the estate. There is still no proof I entered that passage, she said. No witness saw me there, and no object belonging uniquely to me was found inside. Eleanor looked toward Mrs. Finch. The housekeeper stepped forward, carrying a small parcel wrapped in linen. An object was found, she said. I removed it from the passage the morning after Master Henry's first attack, because Lady Beatrice ordered me to destroy it. I could not. She unfolded the cloth just enough for Cedric to recognize what lay inside. His expression changed from confusion to horror. The chairman reached for the object, but Eleanor stopped him. Before it is shown to the room, it must be authenticated by the two people who know why no other person could have possessed it. Cedric rose slowly. Across the chapel, Henry's frightened eyes remained fixed upon his father. Eleanor turned the concealed object toward the light. Your Grace, she said, tell the committee what you gave your sister on the night your son was born. Cedric did not look at Beatrice when Mrs. Finch unfolded the linen. He looked at the small silver key resting in its center. One side bore the blackthorn crest. The other was engraved with a single word, always. I gave it to my sister on the night Henry was born, he said. Our mother's private apartments had been closed for years. Beatrice believed I would forget her once I had a wife and heir, so I gave her the only key and promised she would always have a home at Blackthorn. The key had been made by Eleanor's father. Its narrow shaft contained an unusual double notch that no other household key possessed. Mrs. Finch explained that she had found it lodged inside the service passage behind the nursery clock after Henry's first attack. Beatrice had ordered her to melt it with the damaged silverware, claiming its discovery would distress the Duke. Instead, Mrs. Finch concealed it in the old linen room. Beatrice's composure finally cracked. That proves only that I entered a passage in my brother's house. It proves you lied when you said you knew nothing of it, Eleanor replied. Your backward copy of my initials proves you planted the spring. The maid has admitted you opened my cabinet. The receipts connect your thimble and household authority to the materials. Mr. Vale identifies you as the purchaser of the mechanism. Henry saw you wind the clock. The nightshirt and the apothecary's report establish what the mechanism released, and your knowledge of the hidden mirror proves you understood how it operated. The physician moved toward the side door. Captain Morrow blocked him. Under the chairman's questioning, he attempted to blame Beatrice for everything. He admitted supplying the fumigating compound and falsifying reports of Henry's illness, but claimed he believed the doses were too small to cause permanent injury. Why make the child ill at all? The chairman demanded. The answer came not from the physician, but from Beatrice. Because Cedric replaced me. Her voice echoed through the chapel. She had spent her life protected by Blackthorn's power. When Cedric married Eleanor, household authority passed to the new Duchess. When Henry was born, Beatrice saw the child not as family, but as the final barrier between herself and control of the estate. A dead heir would have brought a murder inquiry. A repeatedly sick heir offered a safer path. If Cedric appeared incapable and Eleanor could be blamed for the illness, the guardianship committee might appoint Beatrice to supervise Henry and influence Blackthorn's accounts. The scheme had almost succeeded because Cedric supplied every opening she required. He ignored Eleanor's warnings about altered receipts. He transferred the accounts to Beatrice, gave her access to Eleanor's rooms, accepted planted evidence, expelled the one person who understood the clock, and signed an order that transformed his suspicion into an official accusation. Beatrice had intended the chapel exposure to disable several witnesses during the hearing, proving that Eleanor's poison followed her wherever she went. But greed made her load too many vials into the furnace, and the servants collapsed before the committee assembled. The chairman ordered Beatrice and the physician held for the magistrate. The physician would face charges for poisoning, falsifying medical reports, destroying evidence, and endangering the household. Beatrice would answer for conspiracy, attempted dispossession, repeated poisoning of the heir, arson, intimidation, and the maid who had obeyed her was released into Reverend Hale's supervision after agreeing to testify. Mrs. Finch's daughters were guaranteed their cottages, and the old accusation against Edmund Vale was publicly withdrawn. Then Cedric walked to the centre of the chapel. He did not ask Eleanor to stand beside him. "My wife was accused before this household by my authority," he said. "She will therefore be cleared before the same witnesses. Duchess Eleanor did not poison our son. She saved him 3 times, first in his nursery, then beneath this chapel, and finally by proving the truth after I deprived her of nearly every means to do so." He named his wrongs without hiding them behind Beatrice's manipulation. He admitted that he had valued reputation above evidence, obedience above Eleanor's judgment, and his own certainty above Henry's safety. He accepted the committee's suspension from the county council and surrendered temporary control of the estate accounts to independent trustees. The guardianship order against Eleanor was revoked. Her name was removed from the physician's accusation, and a formal correction was sent to every person who had received Cedric's original declaration. Briar Cottage, together with its surrounding land and income, was placed in a trust under Eleanor's sole benefit. Her father's tools, correspondence, and personal belongings were returned. She was also granted equal authority over Henry's medical care, with no physician permitted to treat him without her knowledge. Only after those repairs were recorded did Cedric approach her. "I cannot undo the moment I stopped you from touching our son," he said quietly. "Nor can I ask you to trust a man merely because he has finally admitted what everyone else paid for him to learn." Eleanor looked toward Henry. He stood beside Clara, holding the repaired wooden bird. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing you do not freely choose. I will live in the East Wing. You and Henry may remain at Blackthorn or move to Briar Cottage. I will answer every question you ask, and I will accept every boundary you set. If you never forgive me, the public correction and the trust remain yours." It was not enough to restore their marriage, but it was the first thing Cedric had offered without fastening an obligation to it. "I will return to Blackthorn for Henry," Eleanor said. "Not for you." Cedric bowed his head. "I understand. You will not enter my rooms without permission. You will not overturn a decision concerning Henry merely because it wounds your pride, and you will court my trust through conduct, not apologies. I agree. This is not forgiveness. No. It is the opportunity to become a man whom I might one day choose again." Cedric's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them, he did not reach for her hand. Weeks later, the nursery clock was removed from Blackthorn Hall and dismantled under Eleanor's supervision. Its poisoned chambers were destroyed, but she preserved the harmless walnut case. At Henry's request, she and Vale built a new mechanism inside it, one that opened painted wooden birds at sunrise and played 13 clear notes without releasing anything into the air. Cedric kept his distance while Eleanor restored the household, rehired Clara, and placed Mrs. Finch in charge of the nursery staff. He read every account before signing it. More importantly, he asked questions when he did not understand and listened to the answers. On the first morning Henry was strong enough to leave his bed, Eleanor carried the new nursery key upstairs. Cedric waited in the corridor, making no attempt to take it from her. "May I come in?" he asked. Eleanor studied him for a moment, then opened the door herself. "You may sit with Henry," she said. Cedric entered only after she stepped aside. The clock began playing its 13 clear notes. Henry laughed as the wooden birds opened their wings, while Cedric remained beside the doorway, waiting for permission instead of issuing another command. Once, the clock had marked the hour when Eleanor lost her son, her home, and her husband's trust. Now it marked something Cedric had finally learned too late to demand, and only just in time to begin earning. Love could never survive where control was mistaken for trust. Eleanor closed her hand around the nursery key. This time, no one could take it from her.